On behalf of the School of Architecture and Design and our Building Construction 2, ARC 222 guest lecture series, I'm very pleased to welcome you today. Thank you all for joining us in person and online. It is my pleasure to introduce Eleni Tsigarida, an architect and founder of ETSI Architects, based in Kardamyli in the Mani region of Greece and in Athens. Eleni leads a practice known for its thoughtful work across historical restoration, renovation, adaptive reuse, and contemporary architecture in sensitive contexts. Her work consistently pays close attention to material behavior, construction interfaces, and the long-term compatibility between all the new systems. ETSI Architects has received a significant recognition for its work, including major distinctions at the Grail Awards, and the studio's work has also been featured internationally on platforms such as ArchDaily and the Zine and other many platforms. What makes Eleni's perspective especially valuable for our course is that her work shows that construction knowledge is not only about assembling systems, but also about carefully reading existing conditions, making precise decisions, and understanding how buildings actually behave over time. So today's lecture, when buildings refuse to behave, restoration resistant, and why old buildings don't read manuals, speaks directly to that challenge. This is a wonderful opportunity for our students to hear how advanced restoration works demands diagnosis, judgment, restraint, and technical rigor, especially at the point where old and new meet. And with that, I would like to please help me welcome and let us join in welcoming Eleni Tsigarida. Eleni, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Can you hear me? Can everyone hear me? Hi, I'm Eleni. I come from Greece. I come from Mani. It's in the south of the Peloponnese. We set up a business there, and we ended up doing quite a lot of our work within a very, very small radius of about 20 kilometers from that center, which makes us a very, very local business. However, what we do, I believe, is relevant generally to the world, and to the world today, more specifically, and to architecture quite a lot. So we deal mostly in buildings whose regulations are younger. The regulations that govern them today are younger than the actual buildings in most cases. So these buildings were built a long time before anyone decided that they needed to be protected or preserved or anything like that, which makes the whole proposal of restoration a contemporary act in a way. We often deal with this kind of buildings. We deal generally in sensitive environments, but, you know, I'm not quite sure what a sensitive environment is as such. I suppose everyone can judge their own environments. Okay, so what we're going to be talking about today is not so much portfolio, it's about a problem. Okay, now then, the problem starts before we actually talk about restoration. When we're talking about new buildings, and I was listening to the lesson that Andreas was doing earlier, new buildings are designed to behave. They are designed, they follow codes, they follow calculations, there is a sequencing, there's manuals around. All buildings don't. They resist drawings, they contradict any kind of documentation. There isn't documentation in very many cases. They hold memory and damage and improvisation through time, and they arrive with us exposed, and they expose the limits of control over what we have. So restoration is not repair as such, it's negotiation. It's negotiation with structure as such, it's negotiation with time and how we conceive it, it's negotiation with society, because all buildings come with a social understanding and recognition of them. And it's negotiation with meaning in general. Oops, sorry. Sorry, I'm not doing this very well. Okay, here we are. So this is the building that I'm going to be discussing today. It's called the Teloneio. It means the customs house. It was built in the 19th century, and it was built on a rock between the sea and the village. It's physically exposed. It's culturally exposed, and I'll explain why. It's small. It's not this massive, big project like the ones that you would be used to in New York, for example, but it's symbolically very, very large. So it sits between things. It sits between the sea and the land. It sits between privacy and publicity, or private and public. It sits between the past and the present. And before we speak about repair, I want to make a small statement. Restoration is about managing change responsibly. Okay, so this in-between situation is an important starting point. Okay. So now then, these are three images of this building. Now, this building was built in approximately 1790, and it lasted through until photography was brought down to the region. So the first photograph of this building that we have is in 1936. At the time, it was abandoned. It was used by the local fishermen. It was used for storage. It was generally not in use. It had been a fortified customs house for a short while, and then it was abandoned. In 1966, it was a motel. It was privately owned. It was run for sort of people who ended up in the region somehow. There were no roads at the time. And in 2022, which is the sort of year of we finished with the restoration, it has become a home. So these are three very, very different uses, three different eras, three different states, different owners, difficult political context. Is this the same building? Is the main question. And if it is, what are we restoring? Are we asked to restore an original, authentic, first-time situation, the abandoned situation, a beautiful ruin? What are we asked to do? What is it that is important about this building? Is it the form? Is it the use? Is it the memory that it incorporates? Is it the recognizability, the identity that this building might have over time? So that is a question that we're going to be sort of contemplating quite a lot. Okay, so this is the Notre Dame. Some of you might have actually watched this burn live on television. It was this big thing. Suddenly the Notre Dame, actually, during restoration, caught fire. And there it was. And it caused incredible grief. There were people crying all over the world. It was a global event. It was a tragedy. Governments intervened. People made big statements. You had the whole of Paris up for nights crying. Why? Why is a building so important? Now, this building, obviously, we have the technology, we have the knowledge, it has been documented beyond anything. We could rebuild it. Why is it so important when we lose a building, when we lose that? Why does it bring with it such emotion? And the answer to that is because it's about our identity. We feel it is part of our history, and therefore it is part of us, and how we conceive ourselves, and how we sort of construct our narration, our narrative in life. So buildings can be very important because they are related to the way that we see our society and ourselves in the society. Okay, so I should have said all this with this slide. Now, these are front pages from the time that Notre Dame died in so many different languages, and they all have one underlying theme: grief. Okay. Now then, most people saw the Notre Dame sort of burning. Engineers didn't. Engineers started to look at the building as it failed, because that's what happened live on television. The building actually failed because structure is always negotiating forces, the main one being gravity, of course, but other forces as well, fire, earthquake, whatever. And the thing about forces is that if forces are in balance, and this is a very simple thrust diagram here. If the thrust diagram is within the material of the building, and all the forces are within the material of the building, then there is balance. Once this stops happening and the thrust leaves the actual material of the building, we start to see failure. And that's where restoration begins. It doesn't begin when we decide to maintain a building. It begins when we need to do something because this building has stopped behaving like we expect it to. So it's failing, it's not behaving, and this negotiation becomes visible. That's exactly the point when restoration starts. When we need to do something or else, we can do the structure is never actually static. It's quite dynamic, okay? Failure is always a very useful way to understand how things work, because failure reveals that exact point when things stop working. Fire revealed this hidden negotiation, and it just helped what gravity was doing anyway. Okay. Okay, now then, back to our building. So these are the owners. They bought this wonderful house in 2014. They didn't expect it to be a listed monument, which it turned out to be. They didn't expect it to have such a long history, which we researched and found after they bought it. All they wanted was this holiday home next to the sea for their 5-member family. And this is what they got. So what did they get? They got this building that used to be this fortified storage place, a customs house and everything like this, that had been altered over time quite a lot. It had random insertions of toilets. You can see the sewage is on the facades most of the time. And in fact, it actually led at the time straight into the sea. It had quite a lot of interventions. There was concrete on the outside of the building where they tried to sort of contain the building from collapse. The interiors had been massively defaced. So this is where we are when we... But the clients are not on their own. There are many different forces that sort of play a role here. So the new owners, they want this holiday home. The local community, in the meanwhile, have a very strong feeling about this building. It's theirs. It's the community's building. There's a little church next to it. They have festivals around the church, the fisherman dock just outside this building. So they want this landmark of theirs with uninhibited access. And they are quite skeptical about private intervention. They're worried. They're worried that if, as this has been bought up, they will lose their access to the place. And then you have the archaeological authorities who have listed this building, and they would like to see this as a museum. They don't like the idea of this being a home at all. They feel that that's sort of contradicting the sort of essence of this fantastic monument that they have, although they didn't have the money or the resources to restore it themselves or make it a museum or anything like it. So you have these 3 different stakeholders, and they're negotiating. Now, I think that the person who's missing here, or the people who are missing here, are the architects. In fact, they're not. We are the triangle. We are the negotiators. We are the people in the middle who have to somehow, magically, make it okay for everyone, because otherwise this project is not going to work. And if any of these 3 stakeholders is unhappy, we will have problems. Okay. So let's look at this. I mean, negotiation and control are 2 different things. But this project did start as a project, as an architecture of control, of enforcement. It used to be part of this long maritime trade circuit that reached all the known world at the time. So this is medieval times, 16th, 17th, 18th, 19th century. There was these routes that went sort of everywhere. And within the Mediterranean, there was a very sort of close-knit maritime thing, but they had a problem, and the problem was contraband. It was pirates. Now, the Mani, this area that we're talking about, was known as the Little Algiers for a good reason, because the local people were quite resistant. They were, it was a difficult terrain. It was very difficult to get to, and they practiced piracy, land piracy. They would take on ships and loot them, and then they would take people for ransom and things like this. And eventually the Venetians came up with this fantastic plan, and they gave the Magyars the power to set up customs houses. So what they said is, don't piracy anymore. We will run all our commerce, all our trade through you, as long as you offer us safe houses. So this customs house worked as a safe house in a way. The Magyars protected this house. And so the actual building was very much about controlling trade and controlling power at the time. But here, 2 centuries later, we're talking about negotiation, not about control. And when we talk about new buildings, or at the time, maybe when it was built, the idea is optimization. How do I make this better than anything else? Now, it's not about optimization anymore. It's about compatibility. And we'll talk about that quite a bit. Okay, one of the things that I would like to say before we go any further is that this customs house worked as, this was a massive project at the time, okay? It was big, it was, the actual building was not accessible by land, so all the material had to go by boats, all the labor had to be sort of trained and everything like this. It was a big project for the time. But it only lasted for 40 years. After 40 years of working as a customs house, political shifts, the different trade routes, new power schemes and everything like that made it irrelevant. So this building, which was assumed to last forever, that is what the architecture was meant to do, actually history didn't cooperate. So that's part of the story behind this building. So what we got, this is the building as such. You can see that the original building was actually founded on bedrock. So there was jagged bedrock and they built up from there. As I said, there was no access. Most of it was built in different phases, even when it started. So they started with the half of the long building, and then they built from there. They added to the front, and then they added to an extra floor, and then they added a small tower to the side, and then they added a sort of in-between space. And all this was very protected. So on the lower level, you can see that 3 sides, this side here, 4 sides actually, this side, and this side, originally had no openings. There were more than 150 gun holes, however, that we recognize, and there were probably more that had been, so this was a fort as such. The only sort of accessible area was this, that was protected by the actual building and the gun holes and everything like that through there. So this is a process. This building was built in different stages. And then we come along in 2014, and we are asked to change this fortified building into a domestic dwelling. I mean, this is a fantastically big change, because we're talking the same building, but on the other hand, we're talking completely different use and a completely different program. But before we go there, we need to see what we needed to do, because you can't actually start intervening in a building that you don't know anything about. You have to understand how this building was actually built. So in order to do that, we have to take away layers and layers and layers of additions that happened over time, of fortifications and everything like this. And we had to make all these drawings, which made us feel a bit like romantic archaeologists for a short while. It made the archaeological authorities quite happy as well. But it also gave us a good understanding of how this building was built. So we took down quite a lot of plaster and we discovered a few things. Now here we did the drawings of all the cracks. Cracks technically are a language of destruction. It's important to understand the cracks. So you look at the cracks, and if you have enough experience, enough intuition, you can tell certain things. So for example, vertical cracks at corners mean there's been settlement in the foundations. Diagonal cracks mean shear and thrust have lost their equilibrium. Separation between phases means different materials don't connect and don't work together very well. Erosion at the base means moisture and salt have got into the building. So you need to macroscopically understand this building, and you need to document everything that you find during this process in order to understand how it happened. And two of the things that we did understand is that one of the most destructive things that had happened to this building is that at some point they added a layer of steel mesh and concrete to the building. Now then, the concrete, which is a horrible material I will talk about later when it comes to restoration, had actually corroded the steel mesh, and the steel mesh had eaten away at all the limestone behind it. And another thing that had happened is that at some point they put in a jetty, a sort of big concrete structure, and they actually buried the building by 1.5 meters. So that didn't look very good, but it did actually protect the building until we got to it. So in a way, you know, like good and bad there. But this is what we did. We did all this documentation. We also did quite a lot of structural analysis. Now, this means that not us, well, structural engineers in collaboration with us, they built these structural models and they tried to understand how this complicated geometry of different masonry structures works together. And this gave us all these tensile stresses and the different sort of shapes and everything like that. So basically what we found from this analysis was where the building has the least, where it's not stable. So we knew where to look. However, models are only hypotheses. They're not the real thing. So the real thing is the building. So when we actually, later you will see, removed the plaster and everything, we found that some of what these models had told us was true as a tendency, but a lot hadn't been revealed. And we found it when we started to sort of take away more of the thing. So here, this negotiation is not intuitive anymore. It's quite scientific in many ways, but nevertheless, it remains, despite the fact that it has been done to our knowledge to the best possible level, it remains an assumption. And assumptions are often unstable. You need to be very careful with them. The model, in other words, just confirms tendency. It doesn't dictate the intervention. The intervention you have to sort of understand on site. Now then, after we'd done all this, we submitted. Now this happened in late 2014. And then we were talking about negotiation with structure. Here is negotiation with institutions. I mean, this is a different kind of negotiation. We had to take this project and submit it to multiple different authorities. They had very many different contradicting opinions about what we should and shouldn't do, what we should be allowed and what we shouldn't. There were approvals, then there were reapprovals. There were conflicting decisions. There were all sorts. Eventually, 4 years later, in June 2018, we got the permit. Now, this meant that the clients actually stood by us, and that's an important factor to keep in mind, because clients are not happy to have to wait for 4 years and pay for 4 years of endless submissions and resubmissions. Okay, so here we go, we start. No, before we start, I won't go on to all the different proposals and everything like that, but at the time we wanted to do something quite different. And so we decided that what we were going to do was to create these beautiful shaded sort of filters in order to open holes and windows into the lower level, which was a fortified level. And there was a lot of talk about whether we should change the character from a fortified sort of wall into an open wall with windows and everything like that. So we came up with this parametric design, which was meant to sort of be inspired by the texture of the wall and everything like that. And we made the models and everything like that. It was not approved. It was too contemporary. It was too new. It was too visible. It was that, in any case, this is what negotiation is about. You have to bin certain things in order to come to an understanding and make everyone happy in the end. Okay, so innovation in many ways has to pass through cultural filters as well as anything else. So that's an important thing to remember, is that compatibility is political as well as structural. Okay. Okay, so after that, we have the building permit. Oh, it might have been that horrible photograph of me that got it disapproved. But there you go. Okay, so here we are, we start. One of the things that was an enormous change that we had to make is that forts don't need sewage. Domestic use does. So we had to introduce sewage. And of course, we couldn't connect to a central sewage system because there was none in the area. And so we had to build this septic tank. Now, then this was not easy because we are excavating right next to 200-year-old stone walls here into bedrock, lower than the sea level. And we have to make this watertight septic tank that is big enough for normal use. You don't want to have to empty this every 2 weeks. So it has to be relatively big. And they also need an engineering room because they want to install all the different electrical panels, automations and things like that. So this is trying to make invisible the necessity that you need in terms of infrastructure for a building to work. Okay, so all this work, as well as other work that you will see, which is very much part of what we did, was rendered invisible, which is exactly what we wanted it to be. And then we started to remove, oh no, the punchline. Okay, so we started to remove all the plaster. Now then, the plaster that was removed, okay, so we stripped it all back. And what we basically removed was the concrete. And I said I would get this for a minute. Concrete is a very, very strong material. And for many years during the 20th century, it was used in restoring historic stonework and masonry because strength was thought to be durability. But that was proved extremely wrong because the water resistance that concrete actually offered was not protection at all. It destroyed. What happened was that it's rigid, it is impermeable. And so buildings that were treated with concrete, eventually over time, through little cracks, through other problems that the building allowed water in. And once the water was in the wall, in the actual body of the wall, it was trapped because there was concrete everywhere, so it couldn't evaporate, it couldn't leave the building. So this water accumulated within the body of the building and caused enormous damage. In the very short while that concrete was accepted, it caused more damage than hundreds of years, centuries of just normal decay and things like that. So there we are, we're removing all the concrete, and we're finding that this wall is actually in a much worse condition than we thought it was, because a lot of the stones have already been seriously corroded because of the mesh that we removed. And also because quite a lot of the material that kept these stones together has been washed away over the years from the sea, being close to the sea and everything like this. And so here we are, we've completely opened. We have shuttering around the building. This is September. And then one day, this happens. Medicane. This is a Mediterranean hurricane. They exist, and it hit Mani. And it hit this building just as it was in its most vulnerable condition ever. It was completely open. All the pores were open. All the grouting had gone. So all the seawater entered the body of the building. It took 50 tons of clean water and 3 weeks of washing it carefully, because you can't actually shoot water at the building in this condition, washing it carefully with buckets and things like that in order to clean it and bring the salinity level down so that we can move on to the next stage. So here we're negotiating environment again, okay, more negotiation. Okay, now then, the first thing that we did was give it a roof. Now the roof is an important part of a masonry building because because it sort of makes the compression work. Otherwise, you've got walls on their own. Whereas when you have a roof, you're tying together everything. So it was very important to get the roof in. We put in a ring beam, a concrete ring beam as that. So we're not being completely purist here, but we needed the concrete beam. And of course, we had to follow the instructions, the authorities. And the authorities wanted a classic Byzantine style roof, and they wanted non-industrialized wood, and they wanted bamboo as lining, which would be what you would have in this kind of roof. And they also wanted the classic monk and nun sort of style tiles. Now, this was it posed a serious technical problem, because reclaimed tiles, which is what they wanted us to use, are compromised because over time the actual ceramic loses its durability, the porosity allows the water through. So the concave tiles, the nuns, if you like, they just couldn't be reclaimed because of the fact that that wouldn't allow the roof to work correctly. So we came to a compromise with the authorities, and they allowed us to use nuns, new ones that were made specially for the occasion, and then on top, the convex tile, the monk was the old reclaimed. So it looks old, but it works like new. Now, this is a very good arranged marriage in a way. It works. On the top, you have resilience and looks, and on the bottom, on the bottom you have resilience, and on the top you have control and looks. Okay. So after that, the next thing we did is we injected, and I've talked about concrete a little. Obviously, we couldn't inject with concrete. We injected with a mix which is much weaker. So this is lime-based, mostly pozzolan and superplasticizer. That makes the whole thing become much more liquid. It takes longer for it to sort of dry, but the whole idea is that this is a very breathable material, and it allows for the structure to be consolidated. Now, what we found, which was interesting, it was a shock as well, is that we had, based on what we knew and sort of the textbooks and things like that, we had allowed for approximately 10 to 12,000 liters of injections. We ended up with 30,000 liters of injections. Now, that means that approximately 30% of these walls was void. Okay, so one of the things that comes from this is a rather poetic phrase, which is you don't know an old building until you inject it. But it's important to know that, to remember that when we talk about restoration, most of the damage is invisible. So you need to be very careful in what exactly you are doing and how you're intervening. Okay. Okay, so talking about integrating the invisible, another thing that we needed to do was, outside of the consolidation, we needed to introduce tie rods into the building. So the actual building is held together with these steel tie rods. In order to do this, we had to drill holes that went 20 meters into this masonry and through the other side. Now, this meant that this particular crew built a special machine that allowed this to happen. This is technically quite a difficult thing to manage. And we didn't only introduce tie rods, we also introduced the sewage. So this image here is the sewage, so vertical sewage through the walls and everything like that. Now then, the thing here is that if you want to be real, you should, in theory, have all this intervention visible. But if you do have all this intervention visible, and you do a Pompidou, if you like, then what you're doing is that you are actually compromising the character of the building. So it's a matter of how it's about integrating the invisible in order to not violate the visible, if you like. You need to decide what you're keeping and what you're losing. Okay, now then, as I said, this building had no connection. The rooms downstairs were disconnected, so we had spaces that needed to be connected on the lower level, but also the two levels were not connected, so we needed to cut through the vaults. Now, the vaults are compression structures, which means that they work because forces are evenly spread across their surface, and so cutting a vault is something that you need to do with surgical precision. Thank you. So this was probably one of the most difficult things to achieve, but it was also one of the most radical changes we made to this building, because in connecting all these spaces, we actually changed its form far more than I think the authorities realized. I mean, the actual character of the building, which was this fortified, closed, non-connected building, was suddenly opening up and connecting and becoming a home through this. And then we consolidated the vaults from the top. Now, this is what a vault looks when you clean it. So we used the triangles here on the top of the vault in order to install all the electrics and the everything that we needed to do for infrastructure. And then we filled that, but you don't actually fill it with concrete. You fill it with sand, and you just put a layer of concrete over the top in order to keep that sand down. So it's the weight that brings the tension, that keeps it all in place. And of course, after we'd finished, this is what it looks like. So here we tried to establish a continuity. We tried to introduce materials which would not antagonize the original materials. We didn't try to fake it and make it look like it always was that way. And so we also managed in doing so to introduce a door, which is this door here, which is a door that sort of connects the outside of the building on the seaside with the inside of the building. So this cut through the building was, in fact, probably the most radical thing that we did. Okay, but what we did manage, I think, is going back to whether it's the same building or not. We did manage to reinstall a continuity in the forces, a continuity in the structure, and of course, we continued to negotiate throughout the whole process. Okay, I'll go into a different kind of negotiation now. I'll go into the general idea of whether or not it is sustainable to restore. And of course, you've probably all heard the very, very cliche phrase, the greenest building in the world that already exists. Now, this is very true. And the reason why it's very true is that an existing building already has quite a lot of power that is inside the building already. So it has all the labor that was used in order to build the building. It has all the lime that has been burnt. It has all this energy that has been incorporated into the original building. So if we do demolish, and here I'm not talking about this particular building because it was a listed monument, but generally, if we do demolish, then we're not starting from zero, we're starting from negative. And we need to remember that that's what it means when we say the greenest building is the one that already exists. It means that the process of demolishing is actually a very, very violent process in terms of the environment. Okay. So nevertheless, replacement feels clean in many ways. Repair is much more complex. Replacement gives you a lot of control, whereas repair forces you into a dialogue of some sort. Erasure kind of removes conflict, whereas continuity preserves that tension. And I don't think we can live without that tension. I think that, it's part of life as such. Then this image is interesting because I think that, it's recognizable. It has an identity. It's the customs house in Kardamyli. If you see it, you'll know it. But what I did want to point out here is that on this facade, we have 6 different times. So the two windows that have arches on top were built in the original phase of the building. But as you can see, the left one is lower than the right one. So that means that they were built even at that first phase at different phases. So they were the original building had a taller floor and they had taller windows. And then they added to the front of it, and then they built a shorter window there. The window between these two windows was built in the early 20th century because behind that there was a treasury. There was the treasury of the original customs house. So they did definitely not want a window for the treasury. The door we built, it's the door that I've just discussed previously, and the window to the left was built in the 60s when it was used as a motel. So this facade, which looks like a unified facade, actually includes everything. It includes all the different areas, all the different layers of everything that you have. Okay, so this building at this stage is structurally reinforced. It has been injected, it has been stabilized, it has been re-roofed, it has been repaired, it has been connected. Is it the same building? Going back to the thing. And I would say, I would answer yes. I would answer yes. Sorry, can you hear me? Can you hear me? Yes. Okay. I would answer yes, because it has identity and you recognize the identity. So it is the same building. It has changed through remaining the same. Okay, so we deliberately chose a very, very strict palette of materials, and we tried to make these materials as local as possible in order to remove the idea of having to bring things with incorporated energy from elsewhere. So we used a lot of wood, which is olive wood, which is local to the region, as veneer. Nevertheless, it's very difficult to use olive wood as such. We used a floor that is from a local quarry. We actually went and we chose this big rock that they just broken off the side of a mountain, and they cut it specially for the customs house. And this was cut in order to fit the regularity of each space. So the divisions of the floor look the same, but they're not. Each room has slightly different sizes of floor. We used bamboo in the roof that was harvested from the Kalamata riverfront. The chestnut wood for the roof is from another region in Greece, the Ionoros. There is an exception here, and the exception is stainless steel, as you can see. Okay, because we had to introduce all this new function and everything like that, and we had to use a material that is good for next to the sea, because you don't want to use something that is corroded by things like that. So we're not purist as such. I think it's a matter of proportionality. It's how much new stuff you introduce and how much this new stuff antagonizes what you have, or whether it signifies a new layer of intervention as such into the building. Okay. But sustainability is about the materials, of course. It's about the environment, as we explained, but it's also about knowledge, and it's about labor. And we used a lot of local crews. So the roofers, for example, it's this big family. There's 15 roofers. They're all sort of 3 or 4 different generations of people. They all have different roles. The women, some of them actually work on site nowadays, but previously they did the finances and all that. The building crew, the main building crew, is a building crew that did historical restoration for churches in the area, and we sort of employed them to do this work. And they train and use quite a few of the local second-generation Albanian community in the area. So that was teaching these people all these new crafts. The carpenter, who very sadly had a terrible accident after the end of this restoration and died, but he was an incredible artisan. I mean, he really knew his work, and he did things he had never done before in order to accommodate all our crazy ideas here. And of course, there's Agela, who is a local artisan, and she collected 10,000 pebbles in order to set up all these pebble mosaics in the thing. So as a result, this is continuity of knowledge, but it's also sustainable because it's shared labor and it's shared pride. And people who have worked on this building really feel they did something important. And that's part of making it sustainable in a way, because it's now part of this new sort of culture of that area in a way. So 3 forces actually made this building. One of them was the material behavior, the other one was the regulatory authorities. The third was the community participation. And of course, there's the owners who followed up on all this. So sustainability is not a slogan. It's long-term compatibility, if you like. Okay, let's think about what is heritage, because what we're building today is tomorrow's heritage. So it's important to know when we do that, what it is that becomes heritage. Why this building? Why not another building? Why does something become heritage? When does it survive? Because a lot of what we do doesn't survive, okay? When is it protected? When is it loved? When is it filmed? When is it remembered? And I would argue that this is all true when the building is seen as an archive, because a building outside of incorporating energy and culture and everything like that, it incorporates evidence. There's evidence in that building. There's traces of labor. There's traces of mistakes. There's traces of destruction, of environmental things, of political shifts, of changing owners, changing priorities, everything. So this is an archive. When we edit this archive, we are allowing it to continue. We are allowing it to remain part of our conscious identity as such. And talking of identity, let's go back to that question again and again. There is this very well-known philosophical paradox, which is the boat of Theseus. Theseus, do you know what the Minotaur is? So Theseus is this ancient Greek mythical figure who went and killed the Minotaur, and the Athenians celebrated because then they became the superpower of the time. So he came back in this boat, and this boat was kept by the Athenians in order to commemorate him. And they kept replacing bits of it that decayed, and eventually they replaced the whole boat. So the paradox is, if the material is all gone, is the boat still Theseus' boat? So this is something that is very, very central to restoration. And every decision that you make, every time you enter any kind of project, which is a restorative project, it's about what do I keep, what do I lose? It's about making that decision, what do I introduce, and how does this continue? It's about continuity. It's about not losing that identity as such. Oops. Okay, so persistent identity as such. Okay, so this building in the photograph on the left is the Teloneio. It's the customs house before we started restoration on it. And it's in Before Midnight, Linklater's film. That's Ethan Hawke. He actually came to Kardamyli. So this was a recognized, in a way, it's a recognizable building even before we started with the restoration. Then it became part of Assassin's Creed Odyssey, the live action trailer. So these are two very, very different mediums, two very different audiences and things like that. But it is recognizable. And it means that people sort of do aspire to it. And our layer on top of this has made it even more so. So identity is not about fame. It's about recognizability. And so what we need to do is we need to remember, and I believe, we need to remember, and we need to narrate our stories. We need to keep them alive in many ways, because evidence matters. It matters a lot. It allows a place to remain itself while becoming something completely different. Empires collapse, regimes change, borders shift, but buildings endure, maybe not untouched, but continued. So demolition in this era is never neutral. In new structures, identity is projected. In restoration, identity is negotiated, as we sort of discussed. And in a century like this, which is marked with accelerated erasure, environmental, cultural, economic, I think that choosing to repair rather than replace is not conservative. It's deliberate. It's a choice. And we should perhaps remember to make it. Now, whether it's a cathedral or a customs house, the question remains, do we optimize for novelty or do we manage continuity? Or can we do both? Now, old buildings don't read manuals. I think I've established that so far. But they do remember. And if they refuse to behave, it's not because they are acting badly. It's because they're asking to be not to be replaced, but to be understood. Thank you.
It was great. Thank you so much for everything, Eleni. Since I'm going to have to sit somewhere here, do I look good? I want to open up the questions. I want to up the discussion to our audience and see if there is some of our students or professors that I would like to ask you any questions, because I have a couple of them, but I don't want to start dictating where this discussion might go.
I have a question.
Yes.
Very beautiful
Thank you.
presentation. When you spoke about the injection of the concrete, how was that done? Because the final product has very orthogonal corners.
Yeah. Okay, so you do it in two stages. The one is you deeply point. So you point with a grout that has again hydraulic lime and all that. You point it because you don't want all the sort of injections to spill out. So you make it, you close it, and in that sort of deep pointing, you have a grid of all these little pipes that you then inject, and you start low. And as it fills up, it starts to shoot out, and then you close the you close the little pipes, and you go further up and further up and further up. It needs about a month for the mixture to consolidate, and once it's consolidated, you just cut the pipes, and then you point your second layer of pointing, which is what you see, which is the final result. So after you've finished the injections in the deep grouting, you sort of create this final layer. And what's interesting about this final grouting is that it is a recipe that we sort of manufactured on site using the recipe of the original pointing. So we analyzed the original pointing and found what it had. And it was a kind of sand from the actual seabed there, which we couldn't use because it was full of salt. But we found a very similar one, which was from a river. And then again, lime-based hydraulic thing and a bit of just normal sand. And it was made into this putty and then pushed into the and pointed the building.
And did it have to go through a review process with the historical board?
The historical board, actually, after 4 years of extreme pressure through the negotiations for the permission, did very little during the actual process. They would come at sort of, like the important phases. They saw the roof, they saw the final thing, but they didn't have any serious objections to what we were doing. I think mostly because we did what we said we were doing. So,
Anyone else from our students?
Yes.
You want to come a little bit closer so we can hear you? Please. We'd like to see you as well.
Hi.
Hi.
Hi, how are you? You talked about sustainability, and I believe that it's thought around the world that restoration is expensive. So what are some strategies aside from local labor and local materiality that you would implement to make restoration more accessible?
Well, that's a very interesting question because restoration is not cheap indeed. And it's exactly, we were talking about this earlier with my friend here. And I think that one of the things about what we do nowadays is that we prioritize speed and cost as being the main assets. Think about that. Does that make for sort of durable long-term investments? I don't know. So I would say expensive, yes. But compared to what?
So you believe that like the cultural value is much more important than what it's
much
gonna
more
cost?
important. Yeah.
Can I intervene in the question a little bit? Even if we see it in terms of entirely financial aspects, having something that is so close to a kind of landscape that has all these elements that might start affecting it quite rapidly, not having a good quality for whatever you are doing, how long do you think it would stand? I mean, one of the reasons why it was still standing there, even after all these years, I assume it was due to the main construction. Imagine having this building constructed as we do structures in the US, wood frame building on top of a grate, living there with the different layers of whatever materials we are using, which they are more cheaply made. I don't think it would stand for more than 10 years, especially if you had another hurricane like the one seen up there, right?
Yeah, and how can we fight like those big companies or people with money that just want to tear it down and build something new because it's cheaper?
Well, that's an interesting question, and I think the answer is not necessarily within within architecture alone. It's social. I think that it's more about our communities and holding them together. So I think that if a community is strong and circular economy, using local labor, giving people a good reason to exist and everything like that, actually protects against that kind of speculation a lot better than any kind of rule or anything like that. Strong communities work wonders.
Thank you.
Thank you. That was great questions. Professor Wojtek?
Yes. I have a question because there's a
Thank you.
So I have a question about this identity. Always
Sorry?
it's a question about this historical identity. You've mentioned about it, that there is, when we analyze historical building, there is a thin red line that what you can change would lose identity or now. And you mentioned that it's not the thing, and I was really interested to what degree the material is so important, and I will give you an example in just a second, and to what degree the actual form, like you were using compression arches and even introducing new kind of opening, it is aligning with because sometimes this material identity changes, like it's a famous example from Japan, the Ise-Inku Grand Shrine, which is rebuilt every 20 years and been rebuilt for last 1,000 years. So on the one hand, it's a 1,000-year-old building, but on the other, it's brand new when thinking about the material, not the form. Form stays the same. I was interested what in Greece, in kind of even having some experience in New York with landmark preservation committee, what they really value, material, form, or something else? What this identity, historical identity, would be defined?
Well, that's a difficult question because it depends who you're talking about. Authorities, archaeological authorities, they work on certain legislation. There is an archaeological law as such, because Greece has a lot of antiquities and a lot of historical buildings and quite a lot of listed even newer buildings and things like that. So there is legislation, and the legislation is pretty vague. So it's up to interpretation to most people. But it is the case that the archaeological authorities are by definition extremely conservative. They consider that antiquities are in danger, and they believe that the enemy is the actual user. So, you know, like they kind of act against their own interests in a way, because on the one hand, they want to make everything a museum, which is just not going to happen. On the other hand, they don't allow other kind of continuity that would enable maintenance, and they would enable restoration, and it would enable the use of these buildings. So it's notoriously difficult to get building permits to restore in Greece. Most people who work in the area, like myself, I work in the discipline of restoration, we get away with murder when it actually comes to the restoration process. But getting a building permit is probably extremely unlikely if you don't know how to do your political connection thing. But there are these 1 or 2 or 3 really interested and good people in these authorities, and you need to sort of find them, and then you can work with them because they understand.
We have a question from online. So Agnes.
Agnes, she's the owner.
Agnes, can you unmute, please, so we can hear you? Or let me see.
Agnes.
We need to fix something before. Give us a little bit of time, and I'll do that.
I'll send her a WhatsApp.
No, she's already there. Supposed to unmute. Yeah, she should be able to unmute.
Okay.
Any other questions from our audience here? It's slightly different from what we used to examine here in the States about restoration of buildings, I would say, right? Entirely different mentality of materials, entirely different way of restoring things. Probably the systems that we are using on fabricating architecture in the States is, well, it's cheap, but it's also very cheap to maintain. So if something goes wrong, just replace it entirely. And that's what we do. To me, I think it's an important part of the discussion is about how you can actually use these typologies of buildings, maintaining whatever functions they had before, reminding us what the building's history used to be, to the ones that we are trying now to translate for whatever is going to be the new owner or user of
You mean control trade, for example?
Well, yeah, I guess it's about also.
I'm not sure you can sort of restore conditions or situations that no longer are relevant as such. Otherwise, you become a museum.
Exactly.
Yeah.
For me, I guess that was where my question was going, was the reality is with going back to Professor Wojtek's question is that the archaeological departments in Greece that primarily trying to constrain you from everything, even being alive around buildings, is the one that they don't realize that by keeping these buildings as artifacts with zero functioning, it's way more easy for them to start having all sorts of problems. Give a simple example to our students. If for some reason one of the pipes of the water during the winter freezes and starts leaking and the building is not at use, it's going to take months before somebody realizes what's going on in there. And by the time that they might realize it, might also already be too late. So does it make sense to keep buildings as they are? Do we need to give them more contemporary functions? How we restore with more contemporary materials? How we create this fusion? There is not a single technical manual that can explain all the methodologies. And that's what I was suggesting to my students, and I guess I suggest to you as well. It's about critical thinking. And if you think that bylaws or building codes exist for everything, that they're going to guide you through the process, they don't. So the moment that you're going to start dealing with these kind of structures, you're going to realize that law is not enough. Having critical mind, kind of rational logic, being prepared to anticipate things that you would never anticipate. I mean, even the septic tank, for God's sake, it was a, it was a project in itself. Triangular septic tank under the water body, which has to be concealed, not the ones that we have, I guess, here, that they are dissipation ones, which means that somebody has to come there and empty the container, go through the mechanical systems and repair the whole thing. And
next to the sea.
next to the sea with all this kind of salinity.
And you basically don't want the sewage in the sea.
That's another good idea not to.
It's interesting. I do a lot of landmarks preservation projects in New York City. And New York City is very well documented. So landmarks can pull a photo from an archive of 150 years ago, where the building may be used for a horse carriage or something, but they want it to be retail today. And they're more interested on the architectural facade language and less about the use. So, you know, regulation sometimes goes against, like what you're saying, goes against the actual use, end use of the building and future use. And it really becomes this political game is, I guess, one word of trying to get the approval process to the new user, which is kind of different from a real, you know, older history. I don't know. It's definitely a gray area.
To be honest, David, one of the most confusing and kind of life-changing events that I had when I moved to the States 16 years ago is that I would see spaces of spiritual significance, like churches, turn into malls or shops, nightclubs, and that was shocking to me. And I had no idea how you can actually deal with it as a architect, as the person trying to bring these buildings into a second life, or third or fourth, apparently, from what it seems to be
You
the
could be
case.
working years on historical renovation of a project, and then across the street, they're making a total different interpretation, and you're trying to struggle yourself through this preservation details, and across the street, they're doing a modern interpretation of whatever they think. So
It's about the framing, isn't it? I mean, when you frame something, it's not only what you include, it's what you exclude from the photograph. So, you know, like if you're in a neighborhood and you photograph your little project without the neighborhood and without what's happening around the neighborhood, and it's very difficult to decide because you're kind of on morality grounds. You're working on morality grounds. Whereas if you go into the community and you're talking about sort of the use of this building within this community and how that will reflect on them, then it's a totally different question. Yeah.
Can I? Yes, Professor.
Yeah, like a little bit comes from what they I have some experience in New York City. So it is an interesting moment in New York City, but I will ask like about reasons, of course. That's why I'm saying, because on the one hand, we have this landmark preservation committee. We have also state historic preservation, but I will disregard this. So landmark preservation committee landmarks the building, but also landmarks the district. Pretty common. And sometimes within the actual district, you have the building have a great value, in my opinion. But because usually they try to navigate the line, but they also include buildings which within the landmark district, whatever it is. I live in Ridgewood, and we have 4 landmark district. Usually it starts with a grassroots organization, mobilizes and on. So sometimes we have the building not of a great value, but within the actual landmark, which is always interesting story, what to do if you dealing with this building in the way. The second thing, which in our times, which we are so concerned with the energy, is that in New York City, LPC, landmark preservation buildings, are waived from the energy laws. Which also is, I understand, because sometimes, you know, that one pane windows and the actual metal and on, you have. So now a question, how is in Greece? Do you have a district, entire district somehow?
Yes,
landmark?
yes,
How you
so
to deal with this preservation?
So there are two main boards that list buildings or neighborhoods or anything like that. One of them is the Culture Ministry, and the other is the Built Environment Ministry. So these are two different approaches. So the Built Environment would normally list or make villages, for example, conservable, if that is a word, I'm not quite sure, but they would list the whole village, and they would protect it with specific rules of development of everything like that. And then you have the Culture Ministry, which would normally focus on particular buildings. And they might, for example, with this building, it was a listed building, a Mark I listed building, and it also had a 30-meter protection zone around it, which was listed, which has actually worked wonders, because they wanted to make a marina there, which would completely deface the whole sort of little port there. But they couldn't because of this 30-meter protection zone.
What about the energy?
The
Energy that when you're taking a historic building. The way wave you that you can do whatever you can.
It's
right.
Yeah. Historic buildings are generally exempted from this rather strict otherwise regulation of energy sustainability and all the other measures. So especially when you're talking about buildings like this, because in Greece you need to produce part of the energy that you consume if you're building new, which means that you would have to introduce solar energy, PV panels and everything like that, which is incompatible with historic buildings. So they are exempted mostly in terms of infrastructure. You are expected to sort of make them, you know, like damp proof and relatively well insulated, because that's healthy. I mean, you want a healthy environment, but there is a balance to be kept, I believe, and they do. They don't insist on extreme sort of measures in that sense.
Here, the building is waived, but they allow you, of course, do if you want, if it's somehow applied to the rules to use glass and also solar panels if it's not visible. And this is like a key rule that is not visible to the public. Through it, but so it is waived, but it can be used.
Yeah, I'm a bit skeptical, because sometimes it feels a bit like greenwashing, because if you're talking of a historic building like this, you could incorporate, let's say, PV panels into the glazing of the windows. Come on. I mean, how much energy are you really producing there? Is it more, and the cost would be exponential. So
what about the embodied carbon or embodied energy that would be used to get these photovoltaic panels? So.
Yes, and I'm not at all sure that, you know, like it's a matter, it's again proportionality. It's very much to do with proportionality. Is it ideological? Is it moral? Is it political? What is it? I mean, what is the scope behind this? I think is always the question.
We have a question from our audience online that they are curious on how did the community react to the final project.
They love it. They absolutely love it. The local people. I mean, it's funny. This was I'd been in the area working for quite a few years before we did this project. So I moved down in 2009, and we started the project in 2014 and finished in 2022. We were the foreigners as such, like we were invisible. When we completed this project, we were accepted as a sort of local business as well. So it's recognizable. It's become a sort of focal point, and they love it. They really do, and that it's a lot to do with the fact that the owners are very welcoming, and they have not created a sort of bounded, closed, surveyed, protected property. It's funny because a lot of the visitors to the area just knock on the window during the summer and they say, "Do you serve coffee?" Or "When are you open?" and things like that. And so, but they sort of, they laugh it away and they enjoy themselves, and it's great.
I will do the same.
Knock on the window and
Ask
ask for coffee.
Just in terms of building construction, maybe a question. You showed us these great waves that they were really high, kind of creating all sorts of havoc during the construction phase. Are there any provision in terms of materiality, detailing, construction elements that you kind of took over while trying to protect the building from another future phenomenon like this? Because the proximity to this kind of environmental conditions is insane. So
that's a good question. I don't have a good answer.
We'll find out next time. It's going to be another major.
We've tried quite a few things, including sort of trying to install wave breakers into the sea and things like this. It's not that easy, and also Metikins are not that often, and so in a way we're kind of pretending. But I don't think, no, I think that we have done quite a lot to ensure that the building itself is stable enough to withstand. But we weren't prepared for something like this. The building was not prepared for the extreme environmental conditions of nowadays.
Oh, I agree. But maybe, I don't know, some sort of a blinds, so they're going to be only...
There are. I mean, when they leave,
and just...
yeah. I mean, I only have the beautiful photographs here. I don't have all the others. But there are, when they leave, we sort of fortify the whole lower level with panels and things like that.
Going back to its original function as a building.
There you go. I haven't thought of that. I should include it in the narrative.
Original function.
And there a certain final coating or finish with the stonework and the pointing for the salt and being so close to the water?
You mean is there some kind of body that certifies this?
Additive mixture,
more of a material.
Well, the materials that we used were all sort of natural because we were copying the heritage recipe that we found on site. So it's hydraulic lime, it's sand, it's aggregate, and there is this superplasticizer. I mean, there are certain additives that are accepted by archaeological authorities that basically just make the whole mix last longer. The forces that keep this kind of thing together eventually do collapse, whereas you introduce materials that chemically bond these materials between themselves for a longer period of time without reducing the breathability and things like that.
I have an argument about what natural material is, which is part of
I know.
research about these elements, which we can discuss in another time. But for the time being, I was wondering, obviously, changing the use of the building and changing functions and everything else, it means that you have to adapt into a more kind of modern style of life. Introduction of mechanical systems, regulating environmental conditions, all sorts of these kind of things. Was there a particular approach that you used in the way that you had to adapt with regulating humidity, temperature, condition of the air?
The story there is like one of the biggest problems that this house had was humidity because it's very close to the sea. And so we set up this very, very sort of automated dehumidification system that was that sort of regulated itself and everything like this. And then the owners started to live in the house, and they started complaining that in their bedroom there was a lot of sand on the bed. And they kept, what had happened was that we kept all this original mortar inside for historical purposes, and it was in good condition and everything like this. But when we dehumidified the interiors, this mortar started to collapse. So the actual materials didn't work in an environment that was dehumidified. As a result, we had to then go in, and because we wanted to keep these original materials, we had to bond them with a special kind of, what is stereotica?
Adhesives.
Yes, yeah.
Adhesives that they
Yes.
would be a little bit more chemically induced,
Yeah.
I guess.
So yes, again, you don't know, and it goes back to the time sort of element that we were discussing earlier. All these things, all these adaptations, the alterations, the changes, and everything, you need to test them. It's a trial and error sort of situation in which you do your best, you try and be compatible, you try out new things, and then some of them work and some of them don't, and you sort of learn from that process, and hopefully people would learn from what you leave behind, you know, as this heritage for the future.
That's interesting to see
Yeah.
how materials that they used to function under certain conditions historically,
No.
when you alter
Hmm.
the environmental interconditions, they start failing because
Yes.
nobody has tested them for that kind of environment before.
And no, and to be honest,
And what about
how could you?
No, you couldn't back then. But
Yeah.
the salinity, it's something that it's also another one of these elements
Yes.
that you don't know how to react to, or at least I wouldn't.
Hmm.
We know that salt is really bad for constructions.
Well, salt, what it does in this kind of context is that it films stonework. So it films and it crystallizes. And you find this crystallization, well, when we first went there was a lot of it, but now slowly as the years go by, you see which, especially the north side that gets most of the weather.
Almost like a glazing? I
Yes,
guess,
it's like a bit of a crystallized glazing where it's hit by the sea. I'm not quite sure that this is that bad. I guess eventually we will need to clean it away, but for the time being,
It's like
just,
something that works well.
yes.
Interesting. Any last comments, questions, concerns? Might also do a small proposition here for our students that maybe if some of you are ever interested in having a summer internship in Greece,
Yes,
you might want
please
to
do.
contact Eleni here and spend a couple of months in Greece studying the local typology of architecture and construction. Now it's the time to
We had this brilliant student from the UK, and he came over for 4 months, and he joined the builders crew. He went and he worked for 4 months with the builders, these builders. They're brilliant, they're incredible people, and incredible builders as well. And he joined them, and he then went off and did a whole project in London with exhibitions and films and what have you, all blind.
which
There
is
you go.
another suggestion we heard last week from Chris Apple. Join the fabrication industry. Go work with your hands.
Yes,
make
do.
things. And that's
Do.
going to make you advance your knowledge around architecture in general, which is extremely important. You know, have at least a kind of an idea of whatever you're designing, how it might get built, which is what we are trying to do in this class. Because as I was saying to my students today, again, we're not going to be able to teach you a very specific technique, even if Eleni was trying here to teach you how to do this particular building, teach you every single detail on how you can solve the equation of getting this building back into life through building construction. The building next to it, a village later or a village down the road,
Oh, yes.
it will be an entirely different
Completely
case.
story. And it's a different story, not only because it's a different building, built in a different environment and for different reasons and everything like that, but also in our case, because it's different clients. And that's beautiful as well, because you get to know these people, because with these projects take time, they become friends, you get to understand why they're there, what it is that brought them.
Which is
Yes.
another point that I was making to them today. It's not about the money, because you're not going to get rich around the architecture industry. But the reward might be this kind of relationships that you build with the community, your clients, or the supplemental
Yeah.
reward.
It's very rewarding. Guys, you're in the right.
It's amazingly rewarding. That's
It's
what I think
amazing.
as well.
Yes, I really, really think. I mean, it's the most constant thing I've done in my life. Despite the fact that I wanted to become an artist and my dad said, no, you become an architect because it's artistic and it's also a proper profession. And so I said,
So you found the next closer thing.
well, yeah, I thought, well, he's actually quite right. Let's be an architect. And so I did, and I hated it for a while. But it's the most consistent thing I have done. So there.
All right. And with that, I think we need to conclude for today. They can see me